Hi everyone, it's Konrad Bobilak here, CEO of Investors Prime Real Estate and author of Australian Property Finance Made Simple, and welcome to today's video about the coronavirus. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you would have noticed that the coronavirus has swept every country through the world and has had a massive impact on different countries, both economically and in terms of the medical aspect of the coronavirus. And today I've got a guest speaker who will be talking to you about property management and how the coronavirus is impacting tenants and various rules and regulations that are being implemented by the government right now in Melbourne and how that's going to impact your property, especially for those who are thinking of investing in property and for those who already are landlords with existing property portfolios. Now, Cameron's been around for a long time in real estate, 40 years in the market, having successfully done 5,000 auctions, which is unprecedented. He's also a director of Changing Places Real Estate, and he's been a director of some of the biggest real estate agencies in Australia. So Cameron, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for educating our members.
So I'm going to talk today about the impact of your investment property with the coronavirus. So wow, it's been interesting times, that's for sure. And most of you are probably sitting at home in self-isolation watching this video. But Konrad has spoken a little bit about myself. I've certainly worked in real estate a long time, but sales and property management. And I must say I love it, but interesting times like this really is a challenge because there's plenty happening. But I'm just going to go through a few of the interesting points and things that you must take into account as a property investor, that's for sure. So the two main things that you want to be looking at is keeping quality tenants. Quality tenants are paramount, that's for sure. Long-term tenants save you thousands of dollars. So it's so important to have a good quality tenant who stays with you a long period of time. And it's times like this that it's absolutely critical. The advantage of a long-term tenant is it reduces your vacancy periods dramatically to zero as long as they're there, which is fantastic. On top of that, you're also saving on letting fees and also advertising fees. So they're fees that you're not paying by having that tenant stay. You'll also find that a quality tenant will take care of your property. They tend to treat the property as though it's their own, and they stay there long periods and really look after your property very well. You'll find that they'll look after the gardens, they'll really look after the property, reducing the wear and tear, which is so important. We have some tenants who stay for such long periods, they decide to paint the property themselves for you. Obviously they get approval, but they'll go and paint the property because to them it's their home and that's where they live and they're very happy there. Also, they tend to have stable incomes. They stay for long periods because they've got the same job. They might work around the corner or close by, and it suits them in every regard. Also, they're less demanding, so you'll find that they're not asking for things to be done regularly. Quite often they'll go and fix little problems or issues with the property themselves without the property manager and without the owner ever knowing. Also, you should do everything you can to keep such a tenant, because it's times like these where you don't want to be subjecting yourself to having to find a new tenant and going through all the process that's involved now with what's going on. Also, the other thing you need to have is an agent who's got your back. It's really important that when the going gets tough, you've got someone who's very experienced. A lot of real estate agents have had minimal experience. To be a real estate agent or an agent's representative, as it is in Victoria, you only need to do a 1-week course. And that's really on the legalities rather than on how to be a top quality property manager. There's lots of young people in real estate and for sure they have to start somewhere, but I wouldn't want them starting on my property, particularly in times such as this. So there's a few questions that you should ask your property manager, and one of them is, do they have investment properties? Not only do they own their own principal place of residence, but do they own investment properties themselves? Because you want to know that your property manager knows what it's like to not receive rent, knows what it's like to have properties vacant for such a long period, know what it's like to have a hot water service replaced. They're things that unless you've been through that experience, you don't fully understand. And if you're the landlord, you want to know that your property manager does understand those things and does everything possible to reduce your vacancies, to make sure you get the best possible quote for a replacement of a hot water service or whatever it might be. Also, you want to know how many properties does your property manager manage? And you've got to try and get to the bottom of it and get to the truth, because it's times like this where a property manager is really overworked. You can imagine the amount of negotiation that's going on between tenants and landlords right now. Now, some property managers will manage as many as 250 properties. They just can't cope. We have a standard of just 115 properties per property manager so that they can do their job properly. But in times like this, so that they can spend the time with tenants, putting them at ease, and also dealing with you, the landlord, making sure that you're on top of what's going on and you're making the best decisions with the right information that's been provided to you. So the other thing is, can your property manager sell? Now, people say to me, well, why does my property manager have to sell? If your property is vacant, you need your property manager to sell. They've got to be able to push your property above all the other properties that are out there for lease in the market at the one point in time. And again, with times like this, it really is critical because you don't want your property vacant for too long. There's lots of opposition. We'll talk soon about Airbnb properties are now going to full-time tenancy, etc. You want a property manager who can sell your property amongst others. Now, there might be others for rent in the same block, in the same street, across the road, wherever it is. Tenants going to be looking at a lot of properties, and you need someone who's going to push the salient points of your property over those other properties. Really critical. Also, you want an agent who's very flexible in these times because people, have to stay home, but they're allowed out for certain reasons, which can be finding new accommodation. There's been lots of changes about whether you could have open for inspections, whether you could show people or not. As it is at the moment, real estate agents, property managers can show properties. So it's important though that you're flexible to meet people when they're available, so it can be after hours. And we're even doing Sunday inspections at the moment to give everybody every possible chance to view your property, to give it the best chance of being leased as soon as possible. And also, there's been a bit of a tendency that some agents are putting fees above service in these times, which is really disappointing because everyone's got to chip in and sort of carry the load to a point. I'm hearing of some real estate agents who are saying to their landlords, well, we still want to charge our full fee, even though you're not getting the full rent yourself. So when deals are being done on rent, to me, we should be getting our fee based on the rent that we're bringing in, not by what the rent used to be. So, for example, if we're charging 7% and a property's at $400 per week, it's normally $28. But if you've had to reduce your rent to $300 a week, well, our fee would come down to $21 instead of $28, but we're still doing the same amount of work. And in these times, we're actually doing quite a bit more work. But that's just part of it. As I said, everyone's got to carry some of the burden with it. So rental payments, cash flow really is critical also. It's important that you've got the rent coming in so you can pay your mortgage and you can survive in these tough times. So there's been a government ban on evicting tenants for 6 months. So if your tenant's not paying, they can potentially stay there for a 6-month holiday. It doesn't allow for tenants just to walk away from their rental obligations, but if they're not paying, it's making things very difficult for you, the landlord. So your questions you need to ask, do I reduce the rent to help a tenant who's in trouble? And there's a lot of landlords being faced with this proposition. You need to be careful though, you need to be careful that if you do reduce it, what impact does it have on your landlord insurance? And I'll go into more depth with that soon. And also on the various government relief packages that are out there. The Victorian government has just come out with their relief package just yesterday. New South Wales was about a week ago. So there's different things that come into play with these different packages, and you need to be across them and make sure your property manager's across them so they can best advise as to which is the best way forward. What will the bond cover? Well, the bond's usually 1 month's rent. So if your tenant's 3 months behind, it's only going to cover 1 month of that rent, and you hope that then the tenant doesn't leave the place in a mess, doesn't cause damage, which your bond would regularly cover as well. So your bond won't cover or won't protect you for a long period of time, that's for sure. Literally just a month should the tenant just up and leave. Can you maintain a rent reduction for 3, 6 or 9 months? It's important. You might say, okay, well, I'm going to help the tenant out and reduce the rent by $100 a week, thinking that this might only go on for a month, 2 months, but it may go on for much further. We've heard how that in some countries that it's taken off again, the virus, so therefore people are in lockdown or without employment for longer periods of time. So before giving that discount, make sure that you're going to be in a position to be able to survive and pay your mortgage on that property whilst that's occurring. Rental relief in return for a longer lease. Something to consider that you might provide relief at the moment, and then have it paid back over a longer period. So you might drop the rent, for example, by $100 a week, and then you might see that the rent's increased by $30 a week after 3 or 4 months' time to make back that lost rent. But by tying a tenant into a longer lease, if the tenant is in a reasonably good financial position, gives you more comfort by doing it that way. Also, you need, as the agent, we need to deal with the rental arrears promptly and appropriately. Again, if you're looking at claiming some of your losses on insurance, the insurance company will want to see that you've done everything that you should as a property manager and also as an owner to cut the losses and to make sure that you're going through VCAT or any other tribunal to recoup those losses from the tenant. Because if you don't get orders that prove that the tenant hasn't been paying their rent or follow procedures properly, you may have a really difficult time claiming that insurance that you're paying for each year. So some other points on rent, state government response. There's been various responses between the different states. So both New South Wales and Victoria have talked about land tax waivers or rebates. All sounds really good. I mean, the Victorian government's trumpeting that they're putting up $500 million to help landlords and tenants. You really need to look at the fine print of all that because it's not all as it seems. Only 71% of property investors own more than one property. Sorry, only 71% only own one property. So in that case, a lot of investors don't pay land tax, and particularly if that investment property is an apartment, because it's based on the land component of the property. And a lot of apartments don't qualify in terms of their land component to be charged land tax. So any discount in land tax is not going to help most investors, that's for sure. Also, there's a ceiling on it that if your land taxes, I believe, or the value of the property is $1 million or more, you're not going to get that benefit. And just looking at one of the sites, to claim that benefit, you've got to detail how much money you've got in the bank, and this is as a landlord, how much money you've got in the bank, how much your furniture is worth, and a whole lot of other information to see if you qualify to get that refund or rebate. Quite frankly, I don't think very many people are going to get it all. So the $420 million that the government's saying that they're making available for this, you'd be very hard pushed to be able to qualify and get it. So also in Victoria, there is a rent assist. Now, the criteria for this, for tenants, is that they must have no more than $5,000 in savings and they must be paying at least 30% of their income in rent. So that's where the government has set the benchmark as to whether you need help or not. And personally, I think that agents should be looking at the same benchmark. Agents should be saying to tenants, well, see if you can qualify for the various government assistances and packages, and then we can look at rent deals along the way based on that criteria. So perhaps the state government's helped by setting that level. Commercial and retail industry code is a little bit different. Certainly commercial agents are being hit very hard because the income to landlords is going to be hit very hard indeed. So if you show that you're eligible for the JobKeeper program, you're also eligible to get a deduction in rent. So if you think that your business is dropping by 60, 80 or 100%, effectively you can claim that against the rent that you're paying, so you can ask for the same drop in the rent, of which 50% of that drop, a minimum of 50%, is waived completely, so never had to be paid back, and the balance can be deferred. So again, it's up to negotiation between the tenant and the landlord or the landlord's agent. So that's for commercial properties, quite a bit different than what's happening in the residential market, that's for sure. So you need to look at the short-term reductions versus long-term reductions. And what I mean by that is if you've got a property at $600 per week and you're having trouble leasing it at the moment, you might say, okay, well, I might offer a deduction. I might say, well, what if I drop it by $50 a week to $550 a week? Well, that'd save the tenant some $2,600 over the year. But the problem you've got then is that you're then going forward later on a reduced rent of $550. My argument would be to say, well, why not reduce the rent by 50% for the first 2 months, which also gives you a $2,600 discount to the tenant, but the rent goes back to its $600 per week after the first 2 months. And therefore, when at the end of a year, when the lease is up, you're increasing on that base of $600 per week rather than $550 a week, because it's going to be a lot harder to convince a tenant to go from $550 to say $620 a week in a year's time rather than go from $600 to $620. And the tenant still had the same advantage of the same discount of $2,600. So you've got to be really careful how you structure these things. And as I said, they can affect your insurance and other government assistance with what you come up with your tenant. Vacancies. Look, vacancies are on the rise, there's no question. The number of properties vacant has risen by 20%. And quite often it's because people have lost their job and they've got no other option but to leave. Inspections to fill those vacancies have been on, off. It's now that agents are allowed to now show prospective tenants through and prospective buyers through a property, even if they are occupied by tenants at the moment. Just a week ago, they banned that, saying that it was not going to happen, whereas now they've reversed that decision. So we have tenants who are struggling. They've moved to be with friends, so they share the rent. They move back in with parents, so they keep their costs down. But on top of that, you've seen Airbnb banned in New South Wales and restricted in most other parts of Australia. So those properties that were being used for Airbnb, a lot of owners are now calling me and saying, Cameron, can we please put this on a 6-month or a year lease? I need to get rent in. I need to get the income streams flowing. So that's led to this 20% increase in the number of properties that are available for rent. And as I said earlier, just look for those reduced rent periods rather than reducing the rent over the whole period of the lease just to get a tenant. Try and put in that incentive where a week's free rent, 2 weeks free rent, or a month at 50% off, or 2 months at 50% off. Get the tenant in, but have them paying the normal full rent as the lease goes on. Landlord insurance, questions and answers. I'm getting a lot of landlords saying, am I covered? So just looking at these questions and answers as provided by Aon, they're one of the largest landlord insurance companies in Australia. And these answers relate to insurance policies that were taken out before Friday, the 3rd of April, because they had a big influx of people wanting to take out insurance to try and protect themselves should their tenant not pay rent. But question there is, what occurs if following unemployment due to coronavirus, a tenant wants to break their lease due to financial hardship? Am I covered? Well, coverage may be available, and I like that word may, depending on the policy itself, but it may be available if it's through hardship, and you'd need to look at your policy closely. And also, if the tenant defaults, is it claimable? It is, but again, you need to check your policy. And there's a number of different insurance companies. You really need to check your policy with each of them. But the tougher questions and ones you need to be aware of are these two. Can a shortfall be claimed if the landlord and their tenant mutually agree to a reduction in the weekly rental payments? The answer is no. So you can't claim that difference. So if you make that deal, don't expect to get it back from your insurance company. And can rent default be claimed if the landlord and the tenant mutually agree upon a suspension of their rental payments? No. So if you say to your tenant, look, I'm going to give you a month off, you don't have to pay rent, well, you can't go and claim that on your insurance policy. So you need to be aware of these things and, as I said, read the fine print in your insurance policy. Routine inspections. We use the routine inspections to check properties to make sure that they're in good order, to make sure who's staying there, who says they're staying there, and that they've got pets or not got pets, etc. But we're being limited. Routine inspections are on hold. We have a lot of tenants who don't want people coming into their home, understandably, so they are on hold. So it's important that we continue, as property managers, continue to liaise with the tenants to make sure that if there are repairs, that whether they can be held back or not, or whether they have to be acted upon. So we need to be aware of those maintenance issues. So we still communicate with the tenant, even though we may not be able to go to their properties in some cases, we still communicate to make sure we know that your property is being looked after and if there's any problems or issues. Rent reviews. We all want to see rent reviews because if we can get the rents up, it allows us to have larger borrowing capacity to go and buy that next property, which is what we're in this for, is to continue to buy more and more investment properties and build our portfolio. But in these times, forget it. Forget it for the next few months at least. Just of yesterday, it's been banned to increase the rent for the next 6 months in Victoria. It's different in different states. But it's not worth putting the rent up and losing a tenant in these times, because the vacancy rates are up and the vacancy periods are going to be so much longer. So it's really important that you don't lose the tenant at this time. And, you know, I've had some landlords who are saying, oh, we want to put the rent up $30 because we're not coping, we've lost our job, we need to put the rent up to get more income. Well, it's not going to be much good to you if you go and put it up $30 and you lose a tenant and you have the property vacant for 3-4 weeks or so, and also you've got more fees in your leasing fee and also in your advertising. You don't want to be doing that. You're better off showing compassion, letting the tenant know that you're being compassionate, so hopefully it'll come back to you later in terms that they'll sign a new lease, they'll stay longer, they'll really appreciate the efforts that you've gone to. So it's just really important that you look after the tenant, and rent reviews are not the time. This is not the time to go putting the rents up, that's for sure. We spoke about rent increases and delays, but look, these could go on and on and on. We're not sure how long this is going to take and how long it'll take for the economy to pick up and for people to get jobs again to be able to pay their rent going forward. Maintenance, it's always important to have the right advice, but again, we're going to be limited to looking at properties. There's going to be less tenants though wanting strangers in their home, which means that you're probably not going to have so many maintenance requests in the short term. The government's also discouraging people from having repairs done, particularly non-urgent repairs. But we still need to be vigilant. It gets the old saying, a stitch in time saves 9. And what I mean by that, it's important for the agent to go to a property, inspect it, because you might see a small leak in a bathroom that underlies a much bigger problem where there's a major leak in a pipe, and that could cause terrible damage to the subfloor of the bathroom, which could cost you a fortune down the track. So it's still important that we really get back into your properties to continue to check them for any problems as time goes on. Tradespeople, they must practice social distancing. You know, we still have problems. One of my own properties, the hot water service blew up last week, had to be replaced. So they've still got to go to properties, but obviously they practice social distancing and less contact with the tenant as possible. But once these restrictions are relaxed, you're probably going to find tenants are going to have lists of things that need fixing and be prepared for that, and make sure you've got some money to cover some of these things that perhaps aren't being addressed right now. Tenant issues. So obviously tenants are under a lot of pressure. Those who have lost their jobs, it's very difficult. You know, they've got to put bread on the table, yet alone pay the rent, etc. So it is a tough time for everybody, there's no question. One of the things that has come up is toilet blockages, which is a little unusual. And because of the lack of toilet paper out there, people were using other things, and we were finding that toilets were getting blocked. We have to make tenants aware that if they're not using toilets properly in the way that they're designed, and there are problems, that they may have those costs to remedy the situation. Also, look, with repairs, as I said, some people just won't want to have people coming into their home in these times, and they may not provide access. We did have issues with access for reletting of properties, but the government has said that that can be done. It still gets difficult if a tenant says, I don't care what the government says, you're not coming into my home, then that's a different matter. You don't want to go to VCAT because one, there's going to be such a backlog of cases, and it could take months to get before them. But just in any time, you'd rather try and work something out with the tenant, negotiate with the tenant. An outcome that works for both parties and everyone's best interest is what we really want to see, that's for sure. Another query, I have a few landlords coming to me and saying, should I be selling? I've got to sell, you know, the tenant may not pay their rent, what's going to happen? You know, I'm going to lose money. Should I be selling right now? You shouldn't be selling. You should be buying. If anything, you should be buying, that's for sure. Do not sell. You're selling when there's so much pressure out there and people can make some silly decisions. It would be nearly impossible to achieve the maximum price for your property now. Inspections are limited. There's a little bit of nervousness out there with people. They're not sure how long this is going to go on for. Now's not the time to sell. Auctions are going online in some cases, but the results are not fantastic because you just don't have that atmosphere that you'd normally have at a typical auction or an in-room auction because the crowds aren't there. The interest isn't as high, that's for sure. Open for inspections, as I said, open for inspections are banned, one-on-one appointments were banned, but that's been lifted so we can still take clients through. It does mean a lot more work. We had a property that's been open today, normally would be open for 15 minutes and we probably would have had 20 people through it. It had to be open for 3 hours today because we had so much interest in this property where we were taking individuals through every 10 minutes. 3 hours to do the inspections that would normally happen in 15 minutes. So there's no doubt that property managers are also under great stress doing much, much more work. So if you go to sell now, all you're going to do is you're going to find that you're going to miss out on the surge in prices that's going to happen. We saw exactly the same thing with the global financial crisis. The following year prices went through the roof. So significant price increases will follow. There's no doubt in properties. You've got record low interest rates. You've got upcoming shortages of apartments due to the low number of new approvals that's occurring. And also you've got the share market volatility. And Australia is just seen as a very, very safe haven for investors. You look at our relatively low results with the coronavirus, people are only going to continue to look at Australia as a very safe place to invest. And I have no doubt that the market will rise in leaps and bounds once we get through this. So if you, the investor, is having financial difficulties, you need to look at what you do to protect yourself. Obviously, us as the property manager, we want to make sure that your rent's coming in, that it's paid on time. Hopefully you don't have to provide discounts, but in a lot of cases you will. But you've got to look after yourself as well. So you need to speak to your accountant and regarding the benefits and the breaks that are available. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits out there and breaks being provided by both federal and state government, also other bodies as well. There may be some cases with owners' corporations doing less expenditure at the moment so that they keep your costs down. There's a whole lot of things coming into play here. But consider getting an income variation in place. If your rent's going to be dropping, you need to let your accountant know so that you can reduce that tax burden. Also consider pausing your mortgages. You can do that up to 6 months. So in the first 3 weeks of that being announced, there was some 375,000 individuals and businesses that were taking advantage of that. Remember though that you're going to still have to pay the interest on the interest at some point. So look at it and if you can pay, make the payments. That's always the best way to go. But if you need up to 6 months, it's available there for you. But also make sure that you're getting any of these on the basis of the coronavirus, not on the basis of financial hardship, because you do not want it to reflect on you and your credit history in the future. So communication, again, with your property manager, really important. Most landlords don't want to hear from their property manager because they believe that no news is good news, because as soon as the property manager calls, it's usually an issue. The tenant's leaving, the tenant's on a runner, the hot water service is blown up, something's gone wrong. But in these times, it's really important to keep the communication open. We've been speaking to so many of our tenants to find out how they're going. Just getting an idea of what sort of industry they're in. Some of them are in IT doing so well. Some of them are in various businesses that are really doing well in this market. And it's good for us to let our landlords know that so that they're comfortable knowing that their rent is going to continue to come in. Also, we talk to our landlords to find out how they're going, how their jobs are going and anything we can help them with. But it's so important that you talk to your property manager, understand that they're under a lot of pressure, but they're doing all they can in your very, very best interest. Continue to check your statements to make sure you're getting the right rent and talk to your agent, and just if they've got any queries or any questions, give them a call, they'll help you out. But it's really important, as I said, that you've got a real estate agent that isn't managing too many properties, particularly in these times, because you will not get the level of service you need. They're doing so much more work, and that they're really following through and doing the inspections to get your property leased as quickly as possible, doing everything possible to help you. And, look, we are making no news calls just to ring our landlords, to put them at ease, to say, hi, how you going? Hope things are okay. Quite often the landlord will say, oh, what's wrong now? But no, it's not always what's wrong now. We're there to help you and make sure you use the agent. As I said, we're not one of these agencies who are demanding that we're paid the same amount as if the full rent was being paid. We'll wear the pain with you. We've all got to get through this and make sure we come out the other side better. But please, hold on to your properties. Don't sell them because you'll regret it later on because, as I said, we're going to see that rise in prices. But look, there's my details. So if you need to contact me, if you want to send me an email with any questions or queries you've got, our phone numbers are there too, to call the office to help you with any question or query that you've got regarding your property management and your properties. At the end of the day, we want to see that you get your income, that it is a great experience with property management. We don't want you to be a landlord, one of the 71% that has just one investment property. We want you to go on and buy 2, 3 and more. Set yourselves up financially. There's always going to be trials and tribulations, as there's a trial right now with what's happening. But if you've got a good property manager and you keep that good tenant, you're going to do very, very well. So I hope to hear from you and I wish you all the best and stay safe. Thank you.